here. We've made it to top 8. We've got a belly full of Indian food, hearts full of hope, and magic to watch.
Sounds like a pretty good time.
So our first match is going to be the quarterfinals between Aaron Leet. I don't know Spencer's last name. I'm not gonna lie. What is it?
It's Pluger, I believe.
Pluger.
Yes.
On Livian. So these are both players that we saw earlier. Playing for a chance to go to Dallas, or at least a chance to play for a chance to go to Dallas. They're shuffling up right now. So we know both these decks. It's Creativity versus Living End.
Mm-hmm.
This is a matchup that I've gotten to play actually a few times. It is not very good initially, in my opinion, for Creativity, but it is good post board.
That's interesting. What do you feel that the Creativity deck gets post board for the matchup? I mean, you get a couple of Turn the Earths for sure.
Yeah, turn the Earth. Well, he's only playing 2.
Yeah.
So that is rough. I think you need a lot to get through. One of the things that's nice is you're able
the
to
Storms are good too.
Yeah, one of the things that is nice is though you are actually able to discard your threats pretty easily, depending on your build of Creativity, which also helps the matchup.
Yeah, definitely. I remember the last time I played Amulet against Living End. Actually, in game 2 on the draw, I elected to keep a hand and then discard Primeval Titan to hand size and won the game because of it.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. All right, crack it open a water. These guys are presenting.
Yeah, my initial impression would be that Living End is somewhere between a moderate and heavy favorite in this matchup, and it's really going to come down to the fact that Creativity is a very consistent deck, and Living End is a little bit high variance.
Sure. All right, players are presented. Let's go down to the feature match area.
It's also worth noting that Living End has the nut draw advantage in every matchup. So
that's true.
If both decks are going to operate at 100% capacity, I would take Living End over basically anything.
Did Aaron switch playmats?
I am not sure. If you can remember what playmat he was playing earlier, then you have a better memory than I do.
No, I can't. All right, folks, let's get the prediction going.
Yeah, the real problem for Creativity, and this is probably true post board as well, just because there's so much of it, but the problem is that they have a lot of removal spells.
Right.
And typically they are not very good against Living End.
Yeah, luckily the one of the ones that is good is Leyline Binding.
I mean, it's okay. It's just a 1-for-1 removal isn't that good when they're putting out a board of 5 guys, even if it is good at taking out 7/7s or whatever. Do have a couple of copies of Teferi Time Raveler for Aaron, which is definitely a big help.
Yeah, it's a huge help. Something that some of the other versions don't get access to.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to thank everybody for being patient with us during that last round. Coming back and seeing almost the same number of people here is really cool and really appreciated. If you have the chance to drop that Prime sub right here, make it even sweeter for us. Haven't ever asked for a Prime sub on here.
No.
No, I don't usually ask for subs during coverage.
I think if anybody in chat is like me, I just forget to use my Prime sub sometimes, so I appreciate the reminder.
Fair enough. All right, clomp, clomp, clomp.
What I would say, even to add to that, is even if you're not going to use your Prime sub here, you should use it somewhere. But there's no reason to leave that money in Bezos' pocket.
Exactly. He doesn't need it.
Yeah.
I don't have a job. Give it to me. All right, looks like Aaron has presented. An interesting shuffle there from Spencer.
That is an interesting
Never
shuffle.
seen that technique before.
Yeah, I mean, Magic is one of those games where I think a good amount of both superstitions and just like habits come into play. People think that they have better ways to shuffle, but at the end of the day,
It's actually a question I've gotten asked before. Like, what's the best way to shuffle? I was like,
yeah.
till your deck is randomized.
Yeah. Once you and your opponent don't know the order of your deck, that's when it's good.
All right, looks like the players are getting pretty close to ready here. Or there's a discussion going on. Their mic is muted. I muted that so that we couldn't hear the players.
Mm-hmm.
But now I kind of wish it was on because I'd love to hear what they were saying.
It's always so hard to say. I mean, people definitely take their time a bit more in these untimed rounds. So,
do you think that there's any benefit? I mean, obviously there is, but what do you think the level of benefit to Aaron getting to be on the play is?
Yeah, I think that it's a big deal. Honestly, it's if not, even less than Aaron being on the play being important. I think it's important that Spencer's on the draw for Aaron. If that makes sense.
It does make sense, but also it also will allow Aaron to discard if he has things like Prismari Command or not Fable though. It actually won't work with Fable.
Right. Yeah, it's turn too slow still even on the play. Prismari Command being an instant too, you can kind of get some cheeky Archons in the graveyard in response to a living end. And as we pointed out in the earlier round, Spencer doesn't have any main deck graveyard hate, so if an Archon hits the graveyard, it's just going to come into play off of a living end.
All right, players have presented, and we are off to the races. Yeah, I played a challenge with this deck, or no, it was my last league. I played Living End twice. I was like, oh, that's a lot of Living End to play against.
Yeah. Yeah, the popularity of Living End is interesting. It waxes and wanes quite often for seemingly no reason. I mean, there was definitely a point when Living End was perceived as maybe the best deck where a lot of people were playing Chalice of the Void and things like that in their graveyard, where it made sense to kind of dial back a bit on the metagame percentage. But I think from what we've seen from sideboards today, that's very much not the case now. I mean, again, Aaron has a couple of Turn the Earths and a couple of Flusterstorms that help, but really not a ton for this matchup.
Yeah, Aaron's going to take a mulligan here. Aaron a pretty hard shuffler considering what he does with his magic cards.
Yeah. Often very expensive versions of his cards. But I mean, Aaron definitely is the kind of person that is more about playing with the cards than just owning them. He just likes them being pretty, which is fair.
Yeah. I'm team shuffle your cards too.
Yeah.
I don't play with a lot with my own magic cards, so I don't get to shuffle the way that I like. But when I do, I shuffle. What kind of hand is Aaron looking for in game one?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, the Spell Pierces and the Teferis are very good. I think any hand that contains both is just a snap keep if it has, mana to function. And honestly, either or with a functional hand outside is probably worth keeping. I wouldn't mulligan a hand that had an early creativity, but it wouldn't be the optimal uh, hand for this matchup, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, getting them to discard a card is not even that necessarily that good in this matchup.
Yeah, it's certainly not always.
Oh, we see Fable, we see Archon. I think that's a Spell Pierce. Or is that a Triland?
I believe you are correct that that is a Spell Pierce. Looks like Aaron's going to keep it.
Alright, leaning on a Triome. Going down to 18 for Spencer.
Yeah, and Aaron has a lot of the stuff in hand that I would like to see in this matchup. It'll be interesting to see if he values jamming the Fable on 3 here, or kind of slow playing it a little bit.
I think you're supposed to jam, but I'm not sure.
Pretty unclear to me. Yeah, I mean, the decision's probably going to be made for him once. Oh, although Prismari Command actually adds a lot of interestingness to this decision. I actually think that you might be forced to take the Prismari Command here.
I think so too. Taking the Spell Pierce.
Okay.
Jamming Fable.
Did we miss our second land drop from the living end side here?
Very possibly.
That must have been what happened here, which is why Aaron is comfortable just jamming the Fable. Because I think that there's basically no way that you would ever jam Fable into 2 mana there, right? Because
Right.
that's when you have the Prismari Command and the Archon in hand. That's the combo, right, against them to stop their living end. Okay, this second one's gonna come back for Prismari Command most likely. See if there's a second land found.
No, there's not.
It's a little unfortunate. I would like to see Spencer cycle main phase. You're not really representing anything, and like finding a land is pretty important.
Chad pointing out that it's possible that Aaron also just didn't have blue mana at that time.
Oh, that could be totally possible. Yeah,
However, I see a Teferi in hand and a fetch land.
Okay.
So that will unlock the blue mana that Aaron needs to cast that Teferi. And that is going to be really rough for this Living End player to beat.
Yeah, definitely going to depend on the context of the hand. I mean, they have no lands, so, Force of Negation, Brazen Borrower, not too unlikely to have some combination of those, But the clock is definitely real as well.
Alright, Aaron is going to cast Red first. Potentially baiting out a...
Yeah, I guess, the idea here is to try to bait out the Force of Negation with Ren. I think normally you wouldn't use Force of Negation in this spot, but it's possible that Spencer missing land drops feels kind of obligated to get use out of his cards.
Alright, and there is the Teferi. Spencer's telling Aaron to hold up. Still on the stack. And another Force of Negation.
Yeah, the cost is high to, the hand, but it's much better than...
Teferi being in play?
Yeah, facing a Teferi at the very least, and possibly better than facing a Ren and 6 as well.
Alright, we're going to flip that Fable, attack, get a treasure. Bring Spencer down to 14 before fetching.
He definitely has a pretty decent living end still. What happened to that Archon at this point? Did it get discarded to the Fable?
Yes.
So yeah, there is currently an Archon in the graveyard. But even still, a living end might be better for Spencer here because the Archon may not be able to attack profitably at least. Like you can just double block it with the Curator of Mysteries.
Alright, land for Aaron. Pass the turn. Untap here for Spencer. There is a third land. You have to think that the Cascade spell exists, at least at the start of the game, but there were multiple Shardless agents used to be casting those Pact of Negations.
Yeah.
Or, sorry,
Force
of
of Negations, yes. Going to take a read on Archon of Cruelties. This leads me to believe that he probably does have a Cascade in hand.
We're going to get a Dwarven Mine. Copy. Attack. Get 3 treasures.
Going down to 4 life is definitely a precarious position for the living end player, especially when they know that any living end is going to also bring back Archon of Cruelties. Pretty much rules out Shardless Agent as an option because they would get the ETB trigger from Archon and then also be able to attack you with it, which is just 6 regardless of whether your blocks work.
Looking for Violent Outburst here. Looking for untapped land Violent Outburst.
And it basically, I mean, are there, I don't know what kind of basics it looks like there is an island in the deck, so yeah, it wouldn't need to be basic island plus Violent Outburst there.
Aaron with not having to worry about instant speed.
Okay, we are Brazen Borrowing.
The ability will still resolve, and that will put Lethal on board.
Lethal was already on board, right? Or maybe not. Yeah, I guess it would have been 3.
Alright, in game 1 we'll go to Aaron Leet, 1 step closer to Dallas, but Spencer might have something to say about that after Sideboard. Speaking of sideboards, Matt, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about Aaron's potential sideboard options in this matchup. He has, Turn the Earth, Veil of Summers, maybe. I don't personally think that I would bring in Veils. I would probably bring in the Flusterstorms and the Turn the Earths. But I guess that being said, you do need to get rid of 4 Lightning Bolts and probably 2 Fire Ice. I guess Fire Ice is okay at tapping down lands.
Yeah, Fire Ice
probably more interested in Fire Ice than Leyline Binding, to be honest.
Okay. So, and what do we see from Spencer's side?
And then from Spencer's side, honestly, not a lot for this matchup, but that's not surprising because I think it's a pretty decent matchup anyway. Could consider siding in Mystical Dispute just to try to fight over like spell pierces and things like that. Although I don't. I guess that just never works, right? It's 1 mana instead of 2, but I don't like that option. Subtlety not really going to be very impactful. Dismember, you could maybe argue for bringing in Dismember, but I doubt that I would. Force of Vigor, kind of back to what we were talking about before. Like, you can bring it in to try to break up the combo, but it's not guaranteed. It doesn't always work. Especially in a matchup where you're not playing any kind of like lightning bolts or anything like that to target the creatures. They're not very incentivized to target treasure tokens with creativity.
Right. Yeah. Overall, it looks like we brought in very few cards on Spencer's side. Aaron bringing in about the number that you would expect.
Yeah.
Looks
Yeah,
like-
I think that honestly, from Spencer's side, I would side in 0 cards, and I think that it's probably worthwhile to, represent that you're siding in some amount of cards to your opponent. But I don't know. I'm very curious to see what, if any, sideboard cards he elects are worthwhile.
All right. Aaron is done getting ready to present, and we will go back down as soon as Spencer is good. Actually, let's just head back down right now.
I think also a somewhat interesting point is whether Aaron should actually have Leyline Binding instead of Lightning Bolt. Like, I think if you're going to bring in Turn the Earth and Flusterstorm, there's an equal argument for keeping in the 4 Leylines versus the 4 Lightning Bolts.
What's the reason?
I think that the face damage is actually pretty relevant against Living End, because oftentimes you have to fetch shock pretty aggressively. And I think that Leyline Binding rarely ever does anything.
Sure.
In addition to everything else, like, it's possible that your Living End opponent could be siding in Force of Vigors or something that's just going to make that even worse. And also, they can take, if it really was going to be a problem, they can always take it with Grief. So, I don't know. The long story short is I think that the face damage is pretty relevant with Lightning Bolt, and Leyline Binding is not going to be relevant very often.
Fair enough. Players are shuffling up. We should be underway in just a second. Chat, let's get a prediction in here. Oh. Wow. Chat, you didn't vote on the last one. Now we gotta do a new one. So let's start a prediction here. Can Spencer bring it to game 3?
Players definitely pretty considered on their sideboarding decisions here, and taking some time with the randomization.
Alright, looks like a steam vents. Does that turn the earth as well?
I couldn't tell for sure. I think I definitely saw creativity.
Archon. Aaron looked like he wanted to ship that immediately.
Apparently he's not a believer in the turn 1, draw my card, go, put an Archon in the graveyard.
That I actually don't hate that play.
I honestly think it's a pretty good line in this kind of matchup, but we'll see if okay, he
Yes!
does actually go for that line.
And he also drew, for what it's worth, it looks like Aaron actually boarded into his other threat.
Yeah, that looks like an Atraxa, yeah?
It is.
Okay.
So Aaron's going to actually be able to do this again.
Well, there's very high diminishing returns on a play like that, I think. Like, if you let the living end player go up to 4 lands before you play your first land, and now you have all of your threats in the graveyard, it's not really that good. Like, the first one already makes it to where the living end is pretty sus to cast. And the second one, if Spencer has brought in Endurance, the second threat in the graveyard is going to do nothing, and it's just too hard to time walk yourself twice, I think. It's one of the avenues of victory that people kind of forget about in Living End is that you can just actually play fair Magic. It's not a great fair game plan, obviously, but like I've won plenty of games.
You can attack
against...
with 4/4s in the air, and
yeah, it really depends on what matchup you're into. Like any matchup where you're citing an Endurance, like the fair plan gets a lot better. Like just like turn 3 Endurance, turn 4 Curator of Mysteries is a pretty real sequence of cards.
it looks like Aaron has mostly lands, a Teferi, a Creativity.
Yeah, Teferi is probably a pretty big pickup. One of the things I really like about Teferi as well is it really stops the potential for, a fair game plan, right? Like turn 4 Curator of Mysteries against the Teferi is just not a real play that you can make.
Right. We're going to go ahead and grab Steam Vents here. On Spencer's side. Steam Vents will enter the battlefield tapped. Does Spencer have a Cycler? Architect?
It's another interesting decision because you would expect that if you had the Cycler, you would want to cycle before, like either before you fetch the land or just shock it in, just so that if you draw another Cycler, you can also cycle that one now.
Sure. Three lands now. 2 Cyclers in the yard.
Yeah, I would say that the living end is very clearly in the favor of Aaron here. So we're probably not going to see that right away, at least. It's like a Brazen Borrower in hand for Spencer, so it's possible we are going to try to do more of a fair game plan here.
Is that Veil of Summer?
It is Veil of Summer, yes.
Aaron going down to 16.
I do think you have enough cards to board out between Leyline Bindings and Lightning Bolts that it's okay to bring in Veil of Summer. I do like it a lot more on the play than on the draw, though.
Aaron's going to push in with a Wrenn.
Yeah, Wrenn and 6 not the most high impact here, but it is, going to accrue its card advantage.
Aaron's going to go ahead and get a land out of the graveyard. Pass the turn back. No Cyclers.
Elects not to cast the Brazen Borrower either. Probably has it in mind that he needs to save it for Teferi after having seen it in game 1.
Four mana available to Spencer this turn. untap, draw for Aaron. Fluster Storm the draw. Plus the Wrenn. Play the land with the Wrenn. With the additional draw, Aaron is able to then discard the Atraxa.
Okay. Yeah, so by discarding the Atraxa, we're basically saying, you have to Endurance before you Living End. There's no possible way that this Living End gets juiced enough for it to be good for Spencer at this point.
Yeah, it would need to be an instant speed late lethal Living End.
Yeah, which is not easy to do through a 7/7 lifelinker and
Right.
and an Archon of Cruelties.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, just doing the math, it's going to take basically every creature in his deck to be in the graveyard to make that a possibility.
Alright, pass the turn back to Aaron. Aaron will go down to 15.
I guess that being said, now that we're talking about it, if it was just the Archon, that would actually be another good reason to save the Brazen Borrower, right? Because you could Living End for some amount, the Archon comes into play, and then you just like bounce it.
Right.
But with the Traxa as well, I mean, the damage is already done once the Traxa hits the battlefield a lot. And I worry that just even Wrenn and 6 ticking up to Ultimate is too much inevitability in this game. So I hope for Spencer's sake that they did not go with my sideboard plan of no sideboard and did decide to bring in those Endurances.
We're going to crack a fetch land here. Get a Dwarf. We have the Jeskai and the Temur Triumphs in play. So we should be able to cast a Fairy if we want.
Yeah, I think that there's even... we do know that he has creativity in hand, right? But there's no real reason to just jam it here. Like, jamming the Teferi is great because Spencer's not going to be able to do a lot into this Teferi, and if he has Force of Negation, which, yeah, he does, it's going to bait it out before you cast the creativity. And Veil of Summer also a good one here.
Alright. That Brazen Bar being the pitch there.
It looks like a copy of Endurance at the front of the hand here.
Yeah, I think that Spencer is going to try to cast that, and it's not going to work out.
Yeah, definitely would have liked to do that with the Teferi on the stack still. But that being said, well, yeah, we're tapping mana. You ideally would like to pitch cast the Endurance anyway, so you can always do that on your own turn and then Living End.
You can't Living End with Teferi in play.
Oh, right, yes, that's true. Right. Yeah, so the play was probably to cast Endurance with the Teferi still on the stack after Veil. It's like you try to force the Teferi, and then, yeah. Basically this, but with the Teferi on the stack still. So that you can threaten an attack at least. Likely the Endurance would just get bounced, but...
Yeah, I think that because of Teferi, now you're able to safely creativity for 2.
Yep, I agree, and that will likely be the end of this match.
And there's also a Ren and 6 Ultimate waiting to recast that. There's an Atraxa.
It's kind of interesting that creativity requires you to shuffle the entire deck.
It's pretty strong.
Well, it's just interesting, right? Because like all the Cascade cards, after you find the Cascade card,
Right.
you don't have to shuffle your whole deck. I
Right.
just don't understand why creativity is templated in that way.
So Atraxa will reveal the top 10 cards. I see a Lightning Bolt. Looks like you have opted for the Flusterstorm.
Yeah, I think that Aaron still has a land drop to play this turn, or maybe not.
No, because he
Yeah,
got the Dormant Mine.
Right.
And that'll do it for Aaron's turn. Going back. Aaron with another creativity as well. So even if somehow a Living End was possible, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, I agree. I also didn't get to see what he discarded here, but clearly, if he had anything to put in the graveyard, like any kind of Archon or anything, that would have happened as well.
All right, that is going to do it. Aaron is going to take this match 2-0 over Spencer. Great performance by Spencer. But it will not be enough as Aaron moves on to our semifinal, playing for his invite to Dallas.
Yeah, and I mean, Aaron's been on coverage a couple times, and just keeps getting it done in matchups that we don't think are very good, which is just it's the power of creativity, right? It's just a great deck. And
yeah, I still think it's top 3 deck in Modern, and
yeah, I agree.
And just has all the tools as this combo control deck to both steal games, put pressure on the opponent, and win from really adverse odds in a lot of different ways.
And it's insanely consistent, right? Like a lot of its bad matchups are like somewhat inconsistent decks, so it just always has that going for it.